There are an estimated 40 million slaves in the world today. This includes child labour, forced marriage, those forced into bondage to pay off debts from which they're never released, and many other forms of slave labour. This appalling statistic is a bit of a reminder to us of the reality of slavery. And for the world of the Bible, slavery was a great reality at that time too. Different kinds of slavery perhaps, but slavery was very much part of the ancient world, as sadly it still is in the present day. Paul writes about slavery and freedom in our Stand Firm passage today, and it comes from Galatians chapter 5. Now I'm just going to give you a word of warning. I'm picking up at verse 1 and then I'm missing out a whole section and coming back in at verse 13, and I'll explain why when I've read it. So let's just read the passage together. Galatians 5 chapter 1 and then verses 13 to 15. It is for freedom that Christ has set us free. Stand firm then, and do not let yourselves be burdened again by a yoke of slavery. You, my brothers and sisters, were called to be free, but do not use your freedom to indulge the flesh. Rather serve one another humbly in love. For the entire law is fulfilled in keeping this one command: love your neighbour as yourself. What glorious words. Freedom. I wonder what comes into your head when you think about freedom. So as I explained, Paul goes into quite a complicated argument between verse 1 and verse 13, all around the Jewish tradition of circumcision. For the first Christians, who were nearly all Jewish, as indeed Jesus also was himself Jewish, and so were all of his 12 disciples, all the women who supported him, his family, his culture, were all Jewish. And for the Jewish people, circumcision was and is one of those things that mark them out as special and significant. It showed something about their relationship with God. And in the early church, most of the Christians were Jewish, but increasingly there were people becoming Christians who had not been Jewish before their conversion. And there was a lot of discussion about, do you need to be Jewish in order to be Christian? Do you need, if you're a man, to be circumcised in order to have that relationship with Jesus? And Paul here is absolutely adamant that you don't. You don't need anything extra. So he says it's not about law, it's about grace. It's not about ritual, it's about relationship. It's not about rules, it's about faith. It's about trust. It's about freedom. And he brings in this analogy of the slave who's been set free. Now, Paul knew all about trying to keep rules, trying to be the best possible Jewish follower that he could be, and he talks about that particularly in Philippians. But if we look through Paul's biography, he was like the gold champion, medal winner, player of the match, best of all at keeping the rules. But he knew that that wasn't enough to give him the relationship with God that he had found in Jesus. He says that freedom in Christ means no more rules, no more shame that comes with not being able to keep the rules, no more guilt that comes from breaking the rules, and no more religiosity. Instead, we have relationship with God in Christ. And so he says, stand firm and don't give in to anyone who wants to add things to your faith. He says you've got to be a Christian and you've also got to do this, this and this. You've got to keep these rules. You've got to follow those rituals. You've got to behave in this way. You've got to look that way. You've got to be this kind of person, have this kind of education, this kind of upbringing, this kind of manner, this kind of income, this kind of qualifications. Paul says, no, it was for freedom that Christ set us free. Do not be bounded by a yoke of slavery. Stand firm. The only thing he says that tempers our freedom, and it is a big thing, is love. Love your neighbour as yourself. So he says, and this is from the NRSV, do not use your freedom as an opportunity for self-indulgence, but through love become slaves of one another. We're no longer slaves to our old self, our selfish ways and our appetites, but we are to be slaves. We are to serve and love one another. We are to live a life of freedom that also is expressed through kindness, love, service, devotion, patience, forgiveness, gentleness, faithfulness, self-control. He says, do not let your freedom impinge on other people, because you are called to a life of freedom and also a life of love. Stand firm for freedom, but love your neighbour as you love yourself.